The man who took everything from her thought he was watching the end of her story. 5 years later, he nearly dropped his coffee when her face appeared on national television. Derek Coleman had not spoken to Naomi Brooks in almost 8 months when he heard her name echo through the living room speakers. The television mounted above the fireplace displayed bright studio lights, a cheering audience, and a smiling host holding a microphone. Our next guest turned $300 into one of the fastest-growing food truck brands in America. Derek barely looked up at first. He was sitting on a leather sectional inside a suburban home outside Charlotte, North Carolina, scrolling through emails on his tablet while a half-finished cup of coffee cooled beside him. The words barely registered. Success stories were everywhere these days. Then the host said the name again. Naomi Brooks. Derek froze. The tablet slipped slightly in his hands. Across the screen, Naomi walked onto the stage. The audience rose to their feet. Applause filled the studio. Naomi smiled politely and waved before taking her seat beside the host. Her dark green blazer fit perfectly. Her posture was calm, confident. The woman on that stage looked nothing like the exhausted person Derek remembered from 5 years ago. Back then, Naomi had looked like someone carrying the weight of an entire world on her shoulders. Now she looked like someone who had finally put that weight down. Derek stared at the screen without blinking. His heart beat a little faster. Not because she was successful, because he couldn't understand how she had become successful. The host continued. Today, Naomi owns 14 food trucks operating across 4 states. Her company employs over 100 people and serves more than 20,000 customers every week. 14 food trucks. Derek repeated the words silently. He remembered a woman who used to count every dollar before entering a grocery store. He remembered late notices on kitchen counters. He remembered arguments about bills. He remembered the afternoon she handed him the spare key to their old SUV. He remembered believing she would never recover after the divorce. Across the room, 14-year-old Jaden looked up from his phone. Wait, he said. That's Mom. Derek didn't answer. 11-year-old Aaliyah stepped closer to the television. That's really Mom. The studio audience applauded again. Naomi smiled, but there was something different about the smile. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't pride. It looked like relief. The kind of relief that takes years to earn. The host leaned forward. Naomi, people see the success now. The television appearances. The business growth. But very few know where this story started. Naomi nodded slowly. For a brief second, the smile faded. Her eyes drifted downward. Somewhere behind the cameras. Somewhere far away, as though she were looking at a different life entirely. It started, she said quietly, on a day when I lost almost everything. The audience fell silent. In the Coleman living room, nobody moved. Derek felt something tighten in his chest, because he knew exactly which day she was talking about. And for the first time in 5 years, he found himself wondering what happened after she walked away from the courthouse with $312 in her bank account and nobody left standing beside her. 5 years earlier, the courthouse steps were crowded with people carrying folders, briefcases, and tired expressions, but Naomi Brooks remembered almost none of them. What she remembered was the sound of the glass doors closing behind her. She remembered the weight of the envelope in her hand. She remembered watching her children walk toward a parking lot without looking back. The October air felt colder than it should have, not because of the weather, because silence has a way of making everything feel colder. Naomi stood on the sidewalk for several seconds after everyone else had left. Cars moved through downtown traffic. A bus hissed to a stop across the street. Someone laughed near a food cart on the corner. Life continued exactly as it had before. Only hers did not. She opened the envelope and looked at the numbers again. $312. That was everything available in her checking account after legal fees, deposits, and months of expenses. She had been unable to stop. $312. She folded the paper carefully and slid it back inside. People often imagine heartbreak as something dramatic. Tears, screaming, anger. For Naomi, it felt different. It felt like standing in the middle of a busy city while nobody noticed your world had just ended. Her phone remained silent. No messages, no missed calls, no one checking on her. She had spent 12 years building a family. In one afternoon, she felt like a visitor in her own life. A light rain started falling as she walked toward the bus station. Tiny drops gathered on the sleeves of her coat. The coat was 3 winters old. The cuffs were beginning to fray. One button had been replaced with a different color after the original fell off months earlier. She noticed details like that now. When money becomes scarce, every object tells a story. The station smelled like wet concrete, old coffee, and engine exhaust. Naomi sat on a plastic bench near the back wall and checked apartment listings on her phone. Most required deposits she could not afford. Others were already unavailable. Some neighborhoods were unsafe. Others were simply impossible. She kept scrolling anyway. The habit of looking costs nothing. 2 hours later, she found a room available above a laundromat on the east side of town. The rent was low because almost nobody wanted it. The ceiling leaked during storms. The building was old. The neighborhood was noisy. Naomi called immediately. By sunset, she was carrying a single duffel bag up a narrow staircase that smelled faintly of detergent and mildew. The room was smaller than her old kitchen. A twin mattress rested against one wall. A lamp sat beside a cracked window overlooking an alley filled with overflowing dumpsters. Somewhere downstairs, washing machines rumbled continuously. Naomi set her bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress. For the first time all day, there was no paperwork to sign. No lawyer speaking. No judge deciding anything. Just silence. She reached into her wallet and pulled out a photograph. Jaden was smiling with missing front teeth. Aaliyah was holding a birthday cupcake covered in blue frosting. The picture had been taken 3 years earlier. Naomi stared at it until the room became blurry. Then she wiped her eyes, placed the photo carefully beside the lamp, and whispered 6 words into the empty room. I will find my way back. Outside, another train passed through the city. The windows rattled softly. And for the first time since leaving the courthouse, Naomi allowed herself to wonder whether that promise was something she could actually keep. The first month passed one shift at a time. Naomi stopped thinking in weeks because weeks felt too large. She thought in hours instead. 4 hours until work. 6 hours until rent. 3 hours until the bus arrived. 1 hour until she could call her children. Survival had reduced life into smaller pieces. Smaller pieces felt manageable. The diner sat just off Interstate 85 between a gas station and a tire shop. The sign outside buzzed at night, the neon letters flickering whenever the temperature dropped. Naomi worked the evening shift washing dishes. Steam coated the walls. The air smelled like grease, coffee, and dish soap. By the end of every shift, her hands felt dry and rough from hot water. She earned $11 an hour plus occasional overtime when someone called out sick. Most nights, she left after midnight carrying leftovers wrapped in foil because throwing away food felt impossible when money was tight. 3 mornings a week, she cleaned offices downtown before sunrise. The buildings looked different when nobody was there. Hallways silent. Desks empty. Computer screens dark. She vacuumed carpets while city lights glowed beyond the windows. Sometimes she paused beside conference rooms with polished tables large enough to seat 20 people. She wondered what it felt like to make decisions instead of cleaning up after them. She never stayed paused for long. The cleaning company paid by the hour. Reflection did not. In the afternoons, she delivered groceries through an app using city buses and borrowed rides whenever she could. Customers rarely remembered her face. They remembered the bags arriving. That was enough. One rainy Tuesday, she spent 40 minutes carrying 6 cases of bottled water. Up 3 flights of apartment stairs. The customer tipped $2. Naomi thanked him anyway. Gratitude cost less than bitterness. Every Friday evening, she called Jaden and Aaliyah. The calls were short. Children adapt faster than adults. They talked about school projects, soccer practice, birthday parties, and teachers. Naomi listened carefully to every detail. She stored each sentence like something valuable. After hanging up, she often sat beside the cracked window in her room for several minutes staring at the city lights. The hardest part was not missing milestones. It was knowing life kept moving without her. December arrived. Then January. Winter settled over Charlotte. Cold air slipped through gaps around the window frame. Naomi stuffed an old towel along the bottom edge to block the draft. The laundromat downstairs ran day and night. Washing machines rumbled through the floorboards while she slept. Sometimes she dreamed she was still home. Then she woke up and saw the water stain spreading slowly across the ceiling. One evening, she opened her banking app while eating a peanut butter sandwich at the small folding table beside her bed. The balance made her stomach tighten. After rent, utilities, transportation, and groceries, she had $23 remaining until payday. $23. Not after shopping. Not after entertainment. Before everything else. Naomi set the phone down. For several minutes, she stared at nothing. The room felt smaller than usual. The ceiling lower. The silence heavier. She wondered how much longer she could keep doing this. She wondered whether hard work was enough. She wondered whether promises sometimes became impossible. Then her eyes landed on the photograph beside the lamp. Jaden smiling. Aaliyah holding that cupcake. The same picture she looked at every night. Naomi reached over and picked it up. Her thumb brushed the edge of the frame. Outside, a train horn echoed somewhere beyond the city. Inside, she took a slow breath and whispered the same 6 words she had repeated for months. I will find my way back. But for the first time, she was no longer completely sure how. February arrived carrying rain that seemed determined to stay. Water streaked down the cracked window outside Naomi's room for 3 straight days. The alley below filled with puddles reflecting broken pieces of neon signs and passing headlights. On the 3rd evening, she sat alone at the folding table with a stack of unpaid bills spread in front of her. The lamp beside the mattress cast a weak yellow glow across the room. One envelope after another. Electricity, phone service, insurance, transportation, numbers, deadlines, red print, the language of survival. Naomi added everything twice because she did not trust the first total. The result did not change. She was short, not by a little, by enough to matter. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Outside, a train rolled through the city. Downstairs, washing machines shook the floorboards beneath her feet. Somewhere nearby a dog barked. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary night. Yet something inside her felt dangerously close to breaking. The next morning, she overslept for the first time in months. Not by much. 22 minutes. But 22 minutes was enough to miss the early bus. Missing the bus meant arriving late to the office building she cleaned before sunrise. The supervisor said nothing directly. He simply looked at the clock when she arrived. Somehow that felt worse. Naomi apologized anyway. During her lunch break, she sat alone behind the diner beside a dumpster enclosure where employees sometimes ate in silence. The winter air carried the smell of wet cardboard and fryer oil. She opened a container holding leftover mashed potatoes from the previous night and stared at them without taking a bite. Across the parking lot, families came and went. A father helped his daughter into a pickup truck. A mother laughed while carrying 2 paper bags filled with takeout. Small moments. Ordinary moments. The kind that hurt the most when they belonged to someone else. That Friday evening, she called Jaden and Aaliyah as usual. Jaden talked excitedly about a science competition. Aaliyah described a school concert she wanted to join. Naomi listened carefully, asked questions, smiled when appropriate. She knew how to sound cheerful. Parents learn that skill. Near the end of the call, there was a brief silence. Then Aaliyah asked a simple question. Mom, when are you coming home? Naomi opened her mouth. No answer came. She looked out the window toward the gray afternoon sky. Finally, she said, I am working on it, sweetheart. Aaliyah accepted the answer because children often do. But after the call ended, Naomi sat perfectly still for several minutes. The room felt smaller than ever. The walls seemed closer. The future seemed farther away. That night she could not sleep. She lay awake listening to the washing machines downstairs cycle through another load. Midnight became 1 o'clock. 1 became 2. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling and allowed herself to think something she had been fighting for months. Maybe hard work alone was not enough. Maybe effort did not always lead somewhere better. Maybe some people simply fell behind and stayed there. The thought frightened her because it sounded reasonable. Around 3 in the morning, she sat up and reached for the photograph beside the lamp. Jaden, Aaliyah, the same smiles, the same birthday, the same promise she had carried every day since leaving the courthouse. Naomi studied the picture for a long time. Then she noticed something tucked behind the frame. An old receipt she had forgotten was there. A faded piece of paper from years earlier. On the back, written in her own handwriting, were 5 words she barely remembered writing. Start where you are. Use what remains. Naomi stared at the sentence. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Inside, for the first time in weeks, a different thought began forming. Small, unclear, not yet a plan, but something close to one. The idea followed Naomi for 3 days before she finally said it out loud. Not because it sounded impossible, because it sounded small. Most people expect life-changing ideas to arrive dramatically. A lightning bolt, A breakthrough. Something obvious. This one arrived while she was wiping down a counter at the diner at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. A customer took one bite of her homemade chicken and waffles special and smiled. Then another customer ordered it. After seeing the first plate pass by midnight the special had sold out. Naomi stood beside the dish station holding a damp towel and watched the cook scramble to replace ingredients. The thought appeared quietly. People will pay for food that feels like home. She carried the thought with her onto the bus ride back to her room. She carried it through the next day and the day after that. Every time she tried to dismiss it, it returned. The problem was not the idea. The problem was money. Ideas were free. Starting something was not. The following Saturday, Naomi sat in a public library with a notebook and a borrowed calculator. Rain tapped softly against the windows while people moved quietly between shelves. She opened her banking app. $304. That was everything left after paying rent. $304. Most people would see a limitation. Naomi started wondering if it was enough for a beginning. For 2 hours, she researched used food carts, permits, supplies, and local vendor requirements. The numbers looked discouraging, then encouraging, then discouraging again. Every page seemed to say the same thing. It would be difficult, not impossible. Difficult was something Naomi understood. A week later, she visited a weekend flea market on the edge of town. Vendors sold everything from secondhand tools to old furniture and handmade crafts. Near the back of the lot, she noticed a faded pushcart sitting beneath a torn blue canopy. One wheel squeaked. The paint was chipped. Rust marked the corners. Most people walked past without slowing down. Naomi stopped. The owner was an older woman wearing a red jacket and gardening gloves despite not gardening. Her name was Loretta Hayes. 67 years old. Retired. Sharp-eyed. The kind of person who seemed to notice things others missed. Thinking about buying it? Loretta asked. Naomi smiled politely. Mostly thinking about whether I can afford it. Loretta laughed softly. That usually means you want it. The conversation lasted almost an hour. Naomi explained more than she expected. The divorce. The jobs. The children. The tiny room above the laundromat. Loretta listened without interrupting. When Naomi finished, the older woman looked toward the cart and nodded. You know what most people get wrong? She asked. Naomi shook her head. They think confidence comes before action. It does not. Confidence comes after action. You start scared. Naomi looked at the cart again. The asking price was $300. Every dollar she had. All of it. Logic said no. Fear said no. Experience said no. Yet something deeper kept saying yes. 20 minutes later, Naomi counted 3 $100 bills into Loretta's hand. The transaction left $4 in her account. $4. The smallest balance she had ever willingly accepted. She stared at the worn cart sitting in the parking lot. One squeaky wheel. Faded paint. Rust around the edges. It did not look like opportunity. It looked like a mistake. Loretta seemed to read her thoughts. You are not buying a cart, she said. You are buying a chance. Naomi placed both hands on the handle. The metal felt cold beneath her fingers. For the first time in a very long time, she felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Small. Fragile. Easy to lose. But real. And as she pushed the cart toward the bus stop, she had absolutely no idea that this rusted piece of metal was about to change everything. The first day started at 4:30 in the morning. Naomi had spent most of the night cleaning the cart inside the parking lot behind the laundromat. Rust could not be removed completely, but she made it look respectable. She scrubbed every surface twice. She tightened loose screws with borrowed tools. She painted a simple sign by hand using black letters on a whiteboard. Brooks Kitchen. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. Just a name. By sunrise, her shoulders ached and her hands smelled like paint and cleaning solution. She took that as a good sign. The breakfast menu was small because small was all she could afford. Chicken and waffles. Homemade biscuits. Sweet tea. 3 items she knew how to make well. 3 items she could prepare without wasting ingredients. She pushed the cart nearly 3 blocks to a permitted vendor area near a busy bus station downtown. The wheel squeaked with every rotation. People turned to look. Some smiled politely. Most kept walking. By 7 o'clock she was ready. By 8 o'clock she had sold nothing. Commuters hurried past carrying coffee from national chains. Office workers crossed the street without slowing down. Naomi stood behind the cart pretending not to notice. Every few minutes she straightened napkins that did not need straightening. She checked containers that were already organized. She wiped surfaces that were already clean. Waiting can be exhausting when hope is involved. At 10:15, an elderly man wearing a gray veteran's cap stopped. He studied the menu for nearly a minute. Then he ordered a biscuit and sweet tea. Naomi thanked him with more enthusiasm than she intended. The sale totaled $6.25. She carefully placed the cash inside a small metal box beneath the counter. $6.25. The first customer. The first proof that someone was willing to stop. The man sat on a nearby bench while eating. Naomi tried not to watch him. 30 seconds later, he raised his thumb without saying a word. Then he finished the meal and walked away. That simple gesture carried her through the next 2 hours. Unfortunately, encouragement did not pay bills. By 3 in the afternoon, she had earned only $38. The cost of ingredients alone had been higher. On the ride home, she calculated numbers repeatedly. Every version ended the same way. She was losing money. The next day brought rain. Hard rain. The kind that turns sidewalks empty and forces people indoors. Water collected around the cart wheels. Wind rattled the canopy overhead. Naomi sold one sweet tea all morning. 1. By noon she knew the chicken would not last another day. Throwing food away felt like throwing away hours of work she could not replace. That evening she sat on the edge of her mattress staring at a notebook filled with expenses. The pages looked worse than she expected. For the first time since buying the cart, fear returned. Real fear. The kind that speaks quietly and sounds reasonable. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe everyone else had been right to keep walking past that old cart. Maybe. Determination was not enough. Her phone buzzed. A text message appeared from an unfamiliar number. It was Loretta. Only 6 words. How many people smiled today? Naomi stared at the message. Then she remembered the man on the bench. The raised thumb. The customer who came back for extra biscuits. The woman who asked where she would be tomorrow. 3 people. Not many. But not 0. Naomi set the phone down and looked toward the cart parked outside beneath a streetlight. For the first time all evening, she wondered whether failure and beginning sometimes looked exactly the same. The following Monday began differently. Not because the weather improved. Not because Naomi suddenly knew what she was doing. The difference was smaller than that. She showed up expecting the day to be difficult and decided to come anyway. The morning air carried the smell of wet pavement and diesel fumes from city buses pulling into the station. The squeaky wheel still squeaked. The paint on the cart was still fading. The menu was still handwritten. Nothing about the business looked impressive. But Naomi arrived 30 minutes earlier than usual. She wiped every surface clean. She arranged the napkins neatly. She brewed fresh sweet tea and waited. At 8:15, the woman who had asked where she would be yesterday appeared again. She wore hospital scrubs and carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. "You are the chicken and waffles lady, right?" she asked. Naomi smiled. "I hope so." The woman laughed and ordered breakfast. 10 minutes later, she returned with a coworker. By 9 o'clock, Naomi had served 4 customers instead of 1. It was not a crowd. It was not success. But it was movement. During the following weeks, familiar faces started appearing. A city bus driver named Harold stopped every Thursday morning. A security guard from a nearby office building ordered biscuits before every shift. 2 nurses from the hospital began splitting a chicken and waffles plate during lunch breaks. Naomi learned names. She remembered orders. She asked about children, work schedules, and weekend plans. People noticed. Good food brought customers once. Being remembered brought them back. One afternoon, a young college student named Ethan stood beside the cart while waiting for his order. He spent most of the time looking at his phone. Suddenly he held it up and said, "Can I post this?" Naomi looked confused. "Post what?" "Your food." She shrugged. "Sure." Ethan snapped several pictures and uploaded them to social media. Naomi thought nothing of it. She had more immediate concerns, like paying rent and buying ingredients. 3 days later, a woman approached the cart holding up her phone. "Are you the lady from the Post?" Naomi blinked. "What Post?" The woman showed her the screen. Thousands of people had viewed the photographs. Comments filled the page. Most mentioned the food. Some mentioned the story Ethan had written beneath the pictures. He called her the hardest working business owner he had ever met. Naomi stared at the screen for several seconds. Then she handed it back and returned to preparing an order because there were now 6 people waiting in line. 6. The number felt almost unbelievable. By the end of that week, she sold out twice. The following week, 3 times. The notebook that once contained mostly expenses began showing something new. Profit. Not much. $20 one day. 35 the next. Then 52. Small numbers. Life-changing numbers. Every evening Naomi returned to the room above the laundromat exhausted. Her feet hurt. Her shoulders hurt. Her hands smelled permanently of syrup, flour, and fried chicken. Yet something had changed. The room no longer felt like a place she was trapped. It felt like a place she was passing through. One Friday night, she called Jaden and Aaliyah as usual. Their voices filled the room. Their laughter echoed softly through the phone speaker. When the conversation ended, Naomi opened her notebook and reviewed the week's earnings. Then she stopped. At the bottom of the page, she wrote 3 words she had not allowed herself to write before. Food truck fund. She stared at the words for a long moment. Outside, city lights reflected across the wet alley pavement. Downstairs, washing machines hummed through another cycle. Inside, Naomi realized something important. She was no longer trying to survive the future. She was starting to build one. Spring arrived slowly. The mornings became warmer. The line beside Naomi's cart became longer. Neither change happened overnight. Both arrived one customer at a time. By April, she no longer worried about selling enough food. Now she worried about making enough food. She woke up at 4 o'clock every morning preparing ingredients inside the small commercial kitchen she rented by the hour. Flour dust covered her sleeves. The smell of spices lingered on her hands no matter how often she washed them. By 6:30, she was pushing the cart toward the bus station while the city was still waking up. The work was harder than before, but it was a different kind of hard. Progress has weight too. One Thursday afternoon, Harold the bus driver arrived carrying a folded newspaper beneath his arm. He ordered his usual meal, then placed the paper on the counter. "You should look at page 12, he said. Naomi opened the paper after he left. There, near the bottom corner, was a small article about local food vendors. A photograph showed her standing beside the cart, smiling awkwardly at the camera. The headline was simple: Charlotte vendor builds business through determination and community support. Naomi stared at the article for nearly a minute. She had spent so much time looking forward that she had not realized people were beginning to notice. That evening, she carried the newspaper back to her room and placed it beside the photograph of Jaden and Aaliyah. The 2 images looked strangely connected. One represented what she had lost. The other represented what she was building. 2 weeks later, something happened that changed the direction of everything. A delivery company downtown hosted a weekend community event and invited local vendors to participate. Naomi almost declined. The fee worried her. The extra ingredients worried her. Failing in front of a larger crowd worried her most of all. Loretta listened patiently when Naomi called for advice. Then she asked a question. "Do you remember being afraid to buy the cart?" Naomi laughed softly. "Every day." "Good," Loretta replied. "That means you are growing." The event took place on a bright Saturday beneath clear Carolina skies. Families filled the streets. Music played from outdoor speakers. Children ran between booths carrying balloons and lemonade. Naomi worked for 6 straight hours without sitting down once. By mid-afternoon, she had completely sold out. Every biscuit, every waffle, every piece of chicken. Customers were still lining up when she placed the handwritten sold-out sign on the counter. Several people looked disappointed. One woman asked if she had a permanent location. Another asked whether she catered events. A third asked if she owned a food truck. The question stayed with Naomi all evening. Back inside her room, she opened the notebook labeled Food Truck Fund. The balance had grown steadily for months. Not enough, but closer, much closer. She added the earnings from the community event and calculated the new total. Then she looked up listings for used food trucks. Most remained out of reach. One did not. The vehicle was old, 15 years old. The paint was faded. The engine had high mileage. But it ran. More importantly, it was possible. Naomi sat quietly for a long time staring at the listing on her screen. Outside, city lights reflected across rain-soaked pavement. Downstairs, the laundromat hummed through another busy evening. The room felt smaller than it once had. Not because the walls moved. Because her dreams had finally become larger than the space holding them. And for the first time, Naomi allowed herself to imagine a future where customers no longer came to find a cart. They came looking for her name. The summer Naomi purchased the truck felt different from every season that came before it. Not easier, not slower, just larger. The vehicle sat in a gravel lot 30 miles outside Charlotte when she first saw it. The white paint had faded to a dull cream color. The logo from a previous business had been partially removed, leaving shadows of old lettering across the side panels. The driver's seat had a tear repaired with gray tape. The engine sounded rough when it started. Yet when Naomi stood in front of it, she saw something nobody else seemed to see. She saw possibility. 3 days later she signed the paperwork. The balance inside her savings account dropped lower than she liked. Fear returned immediately. Fear always seemed to arrive after commitment. But this time it felt different. This time fear was riding beside progress instead of replacing it. The following weeks became a blur of preparation. Naomi spent evenings repainting the exterior herself. Brooks Kitchen appeared across the side in large black letters. Friends she had met through customers volunteered to help. Harold showed up one Saturday, carrying paintbrushes. One of the nurses brought sandwiches. Loretta arrived with a folding chair and enough advice to fill an entire notebook. The truck slowly transformed from a tired vehicle into something that felt alive. On opening day, Naomi parked near the same downtown district where the old cart had first struggled to attract attention. The morning sky was clear. The air smelled like fresh asphalt warming beneath the Carolina sun. She unlocked the service window and waited. Then something happened she had not expected. Customers were already waiting. Some recognized her from the cart. Others had seen photographs online. Several simply followed recommendations from friends. By noon, the line stretched halfway down the block. Naomi moved constantly, taking orders, preparing food, refilling supplies, smiling between tasks. Her feet hurt before lunchtime. She considered that a blessing. Business grew steadily throughout the year. Community events became regular opportunities. Local newspapers mentioned Brooks Kitchen more than once. Social media posts appeared almost daily. What surprised Naomi most was not the attention. It was the messages. People wrote about family recipes, about childhood memories, about meals that reminded them of grandparents, church gatherings, and Sunday afternoons. The food mattered. The feeling mattered more. One evening after closing, Naomi sat inside the truck reviewing invoices when her phone buzzed. A notification appeared from a video-sharing platform. Someone had posted a short review of Brooks Kitchen. Hundreds of comments followed. Thousands of views accumulated. Then tens of thousands. She watched the numbers climb with quiet disbelief. Meanwhile, across town, 14-year-old Jaden was scrolling through videos after finishing homework. The algorithm served random clips one after another. Sports highlights, comedy sketches, food reviews. Then a familiar face appeared for less than a second. He stopped scrolling, went back, watched again. The woman standing inside the food truck looked familiar. Not because of the truck, because of her smile. He turned up the volume. The reviewer praised the food, mentioned the owner, mentioned Brooks Kitchen. Jaden stared at the screen. Somewhere in the back of his mind, recognition stirred. Not certainty, just a feeling. The kind of feeling that refuses to disappear once it arrives. He opened the account profile and began scrolling through older videos. One clip showed the owner laughing while handing a customer an order. Another showed her speaking at a community event. Then another, and another. Jaden sat perfectly still, because for the first time in years, he was beginning to realize that the story he thought he knew about his mother might be missing a very important chapter. The year everything changed began with a phone call Naomi almost ignored. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon while she was restocking supplies inside the truck between lunch and dinner service. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, she let unfamiliar numbers go to voicemail. Too many sales calls. Too many distractions. Something made her answer anyway. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a producer for a regional television program that highlighted small businesses across the Southeast. Naomi assumed it was a misunderstanding. Businesses like hers appeared on social media. They did not appear on television. At least that was what she believed. The producer explained that Brooks Kitchen had been recommended repeatedly by customers, community leaders, and local reporters. They wanted to feature her story. Naomi sat quietly for several seconds after the call ended. The sounds of the city continued outside. Cars passed. Customers laughed somewhere down the block. Yet everything suddenly felt different. Television. The words sounded unreal. Over. The following weeks, a camera crew followed her through ordinary days. They filmed early mornings in the kitchen. They filmed long afternoons inside the truck. They filmed conversations with customers who spoke about her food and the way she remembered their names. Naomi answered questions carefully. She talked about work. She talked about community. She talked about perseverance. She rarely talked about pain. Some stories still felt too personal to place in front of cameras. Meanwhile, Jaden continued watching videos whenever new clips appeared online. At first he said nothing. Then one evening, he showed a video to Aaliyah. She watched quietly. Then another. Then another. The comments beneath each video surprised them. Hundreds of strangers praising their mother. Thousands of people sharing her story. One Saturday afternoon, Aaliyah looked up from her phone and asked a simple question. Why did nobody tell us Mom was doing all this? The question lingered in the room long after she asked it. Neither child knew the answer. Across town, Derek knew about the videos too. Friends occasionally mentioned them. Co-workers brought them up during conversations. At first, he dismissed the attention as temporary. Social media moved quickly. Trends disappeared. Interest faded. Yet the attention did not fade. It grew. Every month seemed bigger than the last. Brooks Kitchen added a second truck. Then a third. New locations appeared. Local magazines featured Naomi. Business groups invited her to speak. Success no longer looked accidental. It looked permanent. One autumn morning, Naomi arrived at the television studio before sunrise. The building was larger than she expected. Bright lights filled the hallways. Makeup artists hurried between rooms. Production assistants carried clipboards and coffee cups. Everything moved with purpose. Naomi sat quietly in a chair near the backstage area, holding a paper cup of tea. Her hands felt steadier than they should have. 5 years earlier, she had sat in a room above a laundromat wondering whether she could pay rent. Now someone was clipping a microphone to her jacket before a television interview. Life could change directions so slowly you barely noticed. Then suddenly it looked completely different. A stage manager appeared beside her and smiled. "We are ready for you." Naomi stood. The audience beyond the curtain applauded as another segment ended. Studio lights illuminated the stage like sunlight. She took a slow breath and stepped forward. She did not know that somewhere across Charlotte, 2 children were about to recognize far more than her face. And she certainly did not know that one man was about to hear a version of her story he had never bothered to learn. The studio audience grew quiet as the host leaned forward in his chair. The bright lights reflected softly across the stage while cameras moved into position. Naomi sat calmly with her hands folded in her lap. Years earlier, she would have been nervous. Years earlier, she would have worried about saying the wrong thing. Hardship had changed that. When you have rebuilt your life one day at a time, a television interview no longer feels frightening. The host smiled. People see the trucks. They see the business. They see the success. What they do not see is how it started. Naomi looked toward the audience for a moment. Faces she did not know. People who only knew the ending, not the beginning. It started with a room above a laundromat, she said softly. The audience laughed gently, thinking she was joking. Naomi was not. The room was small enough that I could touch both walls if I stretched my arms. The audience became quiet again. She told them about the washing machines running through the night, about the mattress on the floor, about counting dollars before buying groceries, about taking buses across Charlotte before sunrise. She spoke without bitterness, without anger, simply telling the truth. In living rooms across the region, people listened. In Charlotte, Jaden sat on the edge of the couch watching every word. Beside him, Aaliyah had stopped scrolling through her phone. Neither child looked away from the screen. They had never heard these details before. Their mother had never spoken about them. Not during phone calls. Not during visits. Not once. The host asked another question. What kept you going when things felt impossible? Naomi smiled slightly. Not the smile of a business owner. The smile of a mother. 2 children, she answered. Every decision I made started with them. Jaden lowered his eyes. Aaliyah blinked rapidly and looked toward the floor. The host nodded. Did they know what you were going through? Naomi shook her head. No, that was never their job. Silence filled the studio. The kind of silence that happens when people stop hearing a story and start feeling it. Across town, Derek stared at the television without touching the coffee beside him. He remembered those years differently. He remembered paperwork, court dates, financial stress. He remembered believing Naomi would eventually figure things out. What he had never imagined was how difficult those years had actually been. The host continued. You built something remarkable. What are you most proud of today? Naomi looked down briefly before answering. Not the trucks. The audience waited. Not the revenue. Not the awards. Her voice remained calm. I am proud that my children will never have to wonder whether I stopped trying. The words landed heavily. In the living room, nobody spoke. Jaden stared at the screen. Aaliyah wiped quickly at one eye and hoped nobody noticed. Derek noticed anyway. For the first time, he began to understand that this interview was not really about business. It was about a version of Naomi he had never fully seen. The cameras pulled back as the audience applauded. The host smiled and prepared for the next question. Naomi sat beneath the studio lights, composed and confident. Yet what happened next would change far more than her business. Because sitting backstage, waiting for the second half of the interview, was someone carrying a message Naomi had not expected to hear. During the commercial break, Naomi stepped backstage and accepted a bottle of water from a production assistant. The studio suddenly felt quieter away from the lights. She leaned against a wall and took a slow breath. The interview had gone well, but talking about those years had stirred memories she normally kept buried beneath work and routine. Before she could collect her thoughts, someone approached. It was the producer who had first called her months earlier. The woman smiled warmly. There is something I think you should see. Naomi looked confused. The producer handed her a tablet. On the screen was a short video message. Jaden appeared first. Older than she remembered in some ways. Taller. More mature. Yet still unmistakably her son. He looked nervous. Hi, Mom, he began quietly. Naomi froze. Around her, the backstage hallway disappeared. There was only the screen. Jaden cleared his throat. I watched the interview. Actually, Aaliyah and I have been watching a lot of things lately. He glanced off camera and smiled. Aaliyah stepped into view beside him. We did not know everything, she admitted. We knew you worked hard. We just did not know how hard. Naomi pressed one hand against her mouth. Neither child seemed interested in the business. Neither mentioned the trucks or the television cameras. Instead, they talked about the stories. The early mornings. The room above the laundromat. The years she spent building something from almost nothing. I used to think success meant being famous, Jaden said. Now I think it means not giving up. Naomi felt tears gathering despite her efforts to stop them. Then came the sentence she would remember for the rest of her life. Mom, Aaliyah said softly, we are proud of you. No applause from the studio audience could have matched the power of those words. No business award. No newspaper article. No interview. Just 4 simple words. We are proud of you. Back in Charlotte, Derek sat alone after the program ended. The house felt unusually quiet. Jaden and Aaliyah had already gone upstairs. The television screen faded to commercials, yet Derek remained in the same chair. For years he had measured success through stability, income, and responsibility. Looking back now, he realized he had missed something important. Respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned. The admiration in his children's eyes during that interview had been genuine. It had nothing to do with money. It came from sacrifice, perseverance, character. He thought about calling Naomi, then decided against it. Some moments were not about him. Across the state, Naomi returned to the stage for the final segment of the show. The audience welcomed her with another round of applause. This time her smile looked different. Lighter. More peaceful. The host asked what was next for Brooks Kitchen. Naomi answered honestly. More locations. More opportunities. More jobs for people trying to rebuild their lives. The audience applauded again. But Naomi was thinking about something else entirely. Not the future of the company. Not expansion plans. Not growth. She was thinking about 2 children sitting together on a couch, watching their mother on television, and finally seeing the parts of her story she had never been able to explain. And for the first time in many years, she felt certain that the distance between them was beginning to disappear. 3 weeks after the interview, Naomi stood outside Brooks Kitchen's newest location on a bright Saturday morning. The restaurant occupied a renovated brick building near downtown Charlotte. Sunlight reflected off the front windows. Customers filled the sidewalk waiting for the doors to open. Employees moved inside preparing for another busy day. By every measure, the business was thriving. Yet Naomi barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the parking lot across the street. She checked the time once, then twice, then forced herself to stop. Some moments cannot be rushed. At 10:17, a silver sedan pulled into the lot. Naomi recognized it immediately. The driver's door opened first. Jaden stepped out, taller than she remembered, broader shoulders, less like a child every time she saw him. Aaliyah followed a second later, carrying the same warm smile she had possessed since kindergarten. Naomi felt her breath catch. 5 years of phone calls. 5 years of visits scheduled around work and school. 5 years of trying to stay connected across distance. Yet somehow this moment felt different from all the others. Jaden crossed the parking lot first. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled. "Hi, Mom." Naomi laughed softly through tears she could no longer hide. "Hi, sweetheart." Aaliyah wrapped her arms around her almost. Immediately, the three of them stood together on the sidewalk while customers continued walking past. Nobody interrupted. Nobody rushed them. Some reunions deserve space. Later that afternoon, Naomi gave them a tour of the restaurant. They met employees, sampled menu items, listened to stories from customers who spoke about how Brooke's Kitchen had become part of their weekly routines. Everywhere they went, people greeted Naomi warmly. Not because she appeared on television, not because she owned successful businesses, because they respected her. As the afternoon faded into evening, the three of them sat together at a corner table after closing. The restaurant finally quiet. Chairs pushed in. Lights dimmed. For a while they simply talked. School. Friends. Future plans. Ordinary conversations. The kind families collect over time. Eventually Jaden looked around the room. "You really built all this." Naomi smiled and shook her head gently. "Not all at once." He nodded, as if he finally understood something important. Across town, Derek sat alone on his back porch watching the sun disappear behind neighboring rooftops. He had seen photographs from the grand opening earlier that day. Naomi standing beside their children, all three smiling. He felt no anger, no jealousy, only clarity. Some victories are measured in money. Others are measured in relationships. Naomi had earned something far more valuable than public success. She had earned the admiration of the people she loved most. Back at the restaurant, Aaliyah reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "You never stopped trying, did you?" Naomi looked at her daughter and smiled. The answer came easily because it had always been true. Never. Outside, the city lights began appearing one by one across the evening skyline. Inside, laughter echoed softly through the empty restaurant. 5 years earlier, Naomi had sat alone in a room above a laundromat with almost nothing except a promise. Now she sat surrounded by the people who mattered most. The trucks, the business, the interviews, and the recognition were all meaningful. But they were not the ending. This was. A mother who had once been overlooked was finally seen. A woman who had once been doubted was finally respected. And a family that had drifted apart had found its way back together. Not through luck, not through revenge, but through patience, dignity, and the quiet determination to keep moving forward one day at a time.